when you initially are going through this, just really take stock and say, well, how long are these assets likely going to last? And if you don't have enough money there, then you need to evaluate, well, what do I
Welcome
need
to the
do?
Live Greater View, a financial planning podcast produced by VLP Financial Advisors that discusses life, money, and perspective. We help clients live their best life at every stage through our VLP Live Greater partnership process. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome back. My name is Rose Price. I am one of the partners here at VLP Financial Advisors and a certified financial planner.
And I'm Chris Mellone. I'm a partner and financial advisor here at VLP, also a CFP.
Great. So a great topic today, kind of timely with our proximity to the federal government and outside of DC, is we're seeing a lot of discussions about layoffs. Certainly it's been in the news with the current government and their push to streamline and cut costs. But it's not what we're seeing. It's not just the federal government. So I thought we'd talk about layoffs, what you can do when you get that dreaded notification. And also, if you're concerned, maybe some of the things you need to think about to have those in place.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of change that's going on and potentially on the horizon. We've gotten a lot of phone calls and emails about things that have already happened. And then we've also got just as many phone calls of, hey, this may or may not happen. So a lot to unpack today, a lot of things that are basic. But we thought from our position, just given that it's so top of mind, that this would be helpful for everybody to hear.
Absolutely. So let's talk about layoffs, just overview and from the big picture, because this isn't a new thing. Mm-hmm. I think it's just more in focus because it's such a priority for the federal government. And we're seeing, just this week, it was announced today, it was 10,000 layoffs just last month. And those numbers probably aren't 100% accurate because there could be some in process, they just haven't flown through.
Yeah, and I think when we think about the structure of our conversation, there's some generalities that we'll dive right into and then think about it in phases of career to be helpful. I think the first thing is when you get notified, hey, we're moving in a different direction, you are going to be laid off. It's just important to acknowledge that that's obviously, an emotional, event, and just take the time to actually process that. We talk about it within the investing context all the time of if you're thinking rationally, you make good decisions, you think in the longer term, you don't want to let your emotions take over when you have these sort of bigger events. So I think really the first step is just processing, hey, you know what, this is, a big deal, obviously, and not doing anything emotional, whether it's applying immediately for other jobs or, being overly emotional about that decision and just kind of giving yourself a bit of a break.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's important to kind of just set back, take stock of where things are. In some cases, certainly we know with the federal government, there is going to be a severance package. So income's not going to end immediately. Right. And this isn't always true, but most cases, if, depending on tenure, that'll be a scenario. So it gives you that breathing room to say, okay, I don't necessarily have to immediately go out and get a new job. It does certainly provide concern, stress if you do not have a severance package, and you are the main breadwinner. This certainly can come in. So it's good to take a step back, take stock, and then also decide, what is the path forward? Because we'll talk a little bit about it later. Maybe you want to make a change, or maybe there's some reason to make a shift.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the more and more conversations that we've had around this, of course, initially there's that letdown. But we've seen over and over where that's being kind of turned on its head. And now people are looking at this as an opportunity. They're saying, hey, you know what? I didn't know this is in the cards, but it's an opportunity to, be optimistic, look forward to the next chapter. Obviously maybe in some situations their work environment wasn't perfect and they're looking at this through a bit of a different lens and saying, this is what's going to force me to move into that next chapter.
Yeah. And just give yourself time to process the change, right? And we have a lot of clients who said, this is kind of like a blessing in disguise. They were thinking, I really, I was ready for a change. Maybe I want to do something different. And if you have, if you've done the timing and the planning, you should be in a spot where we can adjust and maneuver that correctly.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you obviously go through this, you don't want to jump into something else. And if you just take a step back and say, this is going to be, something that's going to take time to find the right fit, find a new role, let the rest of these chips, fall, where they may, that's again, just going to put you in a better place to make, some of the decisions that you're going to need to make.
Yeah. And so let's talk about some decisions you do have to make. So certainly if your medical is tied to work, we've had conversations on other podcasts about, why is your medical applied to your work, but it is most times. So one of the biggest decisions, if you are the one who holds the medical and the healthcare for yourself or the family, what are your options? In most cases, COBRA is going to be, and also we should back up, depending on what time of the month you've been terminated or your termination is going to go into effect, you do get coverage through the end of the month. So, if this conversation happens at the beginning of the month, you have some time to sort through, or even if you do find another position, but you have to make decisions around healthcare.
Right. And from an insurance perspective, obviously COBRA is there in most instances. That's going to be something that's a little bit more straightforward because it's essentially continuing the coverage that you're used to. Secondly, there's instances where clients have gone on to their spouses.
Yep.
Insurance, that's a bit of a comfort factor there where they know that their spouse is in a stable role, and they go down that route. And then finally, the marketplace, if it comes to that, if your COBRA benefits expire, if the spouse, route is not an option, then finally the marketplace would be the last option there.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of going back to our other points about just this being a process, the insurance on the health side is one part of it. I also think it's important in general of just, hey, take care of yourself.
Yes.
Take care of yourself mentally, physically. When you're firing on all cylinders from that aspect, you tend to make better decisions.
Yeah, and when you get a jolt like this, which is a change to your routine and your day and kind of your future,
right,
it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, let me just take stock. And not everything has to be financial, right? Some of that health comes into is it a good time to maybe take some time off, reevaluate where things are, which leads into kind of our next thing. Once you think about, okay, I've gotten the notification, I've sent, I got to figure out what the next path forward is. I got to figure out healthcare. What's your emergency fund look like?
Yeah, and this is why when we're going through the basics of financial planning, when we're in even bull markets, we just say, hey, you know what? It's so important to have that emergency fund.
Yep.
You just never know when something like this is going to happen. So first things first, you want to really evaluate that fund. Optimally, you'll have between 3 to 6 months of expenses set aside in that fund. When you initially are going through this, just really take stock and say, well, how long are these assets likely going to last? And if you don't have enough money there, then you need to evaluate, well, what do I need to do? Whether it's raise money from other investments or cut out some sort of expenses to get that to a reasonable number.
Yeah, and that's another, it's kind of finding that middle ground. If you are single, we're likely going to want you to have that 6 months, right? If you have 2 incomes coming in, then 3 months might be sufficient because hopefully you're not both losing your employment. But it is important to understand, what other resources do you have? In some cases, what do you have in savings? Do you have an investment account that you can tap without concerns? And if not, what are the options if you have to tap your 401k? And how does that look? So it's definitely something to think and walk through. And this certainly can bring that all to light.
Yeah. And then, going from where you were to where you're going, it's a great opportunity to look at your budget. Hey, is there stuff that, has really kind of
crept up,
fallen between the cracks and we, didn't really acknowledge it. And now it's here. Now we're just using this as an opportunity to reset the deck and evaluate that piece. Obviously, if you think you're going to be out of work for an extended period of time, you're going to want to cut out, anything that's not absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and some things might come to that, might actually be a result of your layoff because maybe you're not stopping at Starbucks on your way into work. Maybe you're not going out to lunch. There's some of those things that will naturally, dry cleaning, we just talked about that a little bit, is, maybe these things will naturally cut out while you're not going to work. But it is important to see, okay, where can I tighten the belt? How can I adjust until we kind of figure out what the new path is?
Yep. Again, just trying to look at this from a different lens of, hey, this is an opportunity to get to a better place when I get to the other side of what I'm dealing with. Yep.
So let's shift and talk about, so it's not just layoffs and, we're talking about layoffs in general, but let's talk about the different stages you are in your career. So we'll talk about the early stage. So maybe you're younger, unfortunately you're in your 20s and 30s, you get this notification and you're thinking, oh, geez, maybe I thought I was going to be here longer. Maybe not, because we know there's a lot of job hopping from earlier generations now. But it is, some of the things you need to think about is, hey, here I am. Maybe this isn't the career I wanted to be in, but I was comfortable.
Yeah, and this is one of the things where it's, hey, there's a silver lining to this. I've been dealt this hand. Take a step back and say, I've been doing this. I have my feet under me. Is this really what I love? Is this really where I see myself for the next, 30 plus years? we've had some instances where clients have, gone through this and they're earlier in their career and they say, you know what, I'm going to look at this as a positive, and it ends up being, in some instances, the best thing, in their words, that's happened to them,
Yep.
and really force them to make a change and either change industries, change roles within their industry, and just get to a better place.
And in some cases, go back to school.
Yeah.
We've had some clients who just said, I really wanted to go get my master's or my PhD. And they've said, this is an opportunity for me to kind of rethink that scenario, pivot, and make that change. So it's not the end of the world. Again, you have to think about all those important things. What do expenses look like? How's healthcare going to be covered? Do you have a safety net? And then, what are you going to do and adjust? Because obviously, especially if you go back to school, expenses are going to be something you really have to hone in on.
Yeah, for sure. So early career, that's a bit more straightforward. That's in some instances a pretty clean reset. Mid-career, that
Yep.
tends to be a lot more challenging. We've had that happen in instances from anywhere from 15 years plus. You're not quite on the verge of retirement, but obviously you're well established in your career. That's where there's other moving parts like kids and typically higher salaries,
Houses and pets, and the list goes on. Yeah.
So this is definitely the toughest, I would say, the toughest hand of the group. So let's unpack, some of that and just give context to that.
Yeah. So certainly when you have a family, you're going to have more responsibility. So there's going to be more needs. And certainly if you're the main breadwinner, there's going to be a lot more stress involved there. In some instances, you also might be what we call the sandwich generation. You're taking care of your kids and your parents are aging, and you're also supplying, time and energy, and maybe even sometimes, financial support. So logistically, what happens is now you get, there's things you can do and leverage. Are there connections? Do you want to stay in this industry? Is there people that you've worked with who've moved on that, maybe you need to talk, or it's a good time to even, if you have a mentor or don't have a mentor, seek someone out. Mm-hmm. Hey, here's my scenario. I think I need, here's my concerns. I need to find, something that I want to do, because you don't want to make a shift quickly and without thought into another spot where maybe they're going to lay off too. Mm-hmm. So you got to be cognizant of, hey, where is the industry I'm in? Is this the industry I want to stay in? And, what is it that I want to do?
Right. And I think out of these sort of buckets that we're talking about, networking is so important in this, mid-career phase, because at that, stage, you're obviously well established, and that's really, the people that you can rely on, or people that you may have been connected with early in your career, and they're likely, in some instances on their second or third job. So they have, a bigger network themselves. So that's just something to keep in mind. Also within this segment, it's interesting when this has happened, we've had clients that have really shifted their commitment to work. Like we've had instances where they say, hey, you know what? I have a family now. I loved, doing the 60, 70 hour weeks earlier in my career. This has really given me an opportunity to reevaluate those portions of my life. And I'm actually going to, when I go back to work in something different and less of a commitment.
Yeah. And that also comes with the freedom of understanding where your expenses are, what you need to support the family. And that certainly has been we've seen that a lot of times. We've seen a lot of people who say, maybe I want to go into a role where I don't manage people anymore. And that is something that's very common.
Sure.
They've done the management thing. They've said, you know what, it was fun, but I could do without that. It's not for everybody, for sure.
Yep.
So it's definitely been a scenario that we've seen play out time and time again. And also, and work-life balance is a conversation we have a lot now. And COVID brought that a lot along the lines. Certainly the ability to work remote. I mean, we've talked about that too. I mean, that's part of the reason the government wants to bring everybody back in. A lot of companies are following suit. So a lot of people have adjusted to this lifestyle of being able to work from home and maybe a few days in the office. And we're starting to see that shift. So that's something that they might be more interested in. Well, I don't want to go drive back into the city anymore. I live in the suburbs. Maybe there's an opportunity to find something closer, more convenient, that gives me more of a work-life balance.
Yeah, and you definitely know by this point, obviously what you like,
right,
what you don't like.
Yeah.
So this, again, looking at the silver lining will put you in a position of, hey, I like this, I don't like that. I'm going to find a role that's a great fit, and then hopefully stay in that role for an extended period of time after that.
Yeah. So it does give them an opportunity to rebalance. So one of the other things, late career, and this is one that probably we're seeing more of just because, again, our proximity where some of the clients who work for the government, are eligible to retire and take their pension. It's been on discussion we've had. They've been saying, oh, maybe I'll do this for another 2, 3, or 4 years. And now they're going, maybe I'll just take this buyout package. And that's not uncommon in lots of companies. Lots of companies come through and say, hey, we're going to do layoffs and we're going to offer packages. So let's just talk a little bit about late stage. You're potentially faced with this layoff and kind of how you might approach that.
Yeah, if we think big picture about this stage, kind of going back to, well, what is retirement in this day and age? It's not in our, in most situations, it's not this destination that you go to and you say, hey, I'm going to get there, and it's like a light switch. And
right.
Next thing you know, you're
on a
one
beach.
Day and you're retired.
Yeah. Eli Manning's there with some Coronas. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, retirement in this context, to us, it's more about, hey, do you have the flexibility and the freedom to really do what you'd like at that point? And more often than not, fortunately, we're fortunate enough to work with clients that are in that situation where, like you said, they're sort of already there, where they say, hey, you know what, I like what I do. I may retire in the next couple of years, but for whatever reason, they've been dragging their feet or they're not sure what they're going to do. And a lot of times this situation will really put their feet to the fire, and they're like, okay, now I'm really going to have to make a decision of, do I want to stay in the workforce, whether it's on boards, consulting with another company, or am I going to go in a different direction and completely retire?
And also I tell clients, this is an opportunity to test retirement. So you can get this layoff and maybe say, well, what if I wanted to do something part-time? Because, one of the concerns we see a lot is when you go from that busy work life and immediately to retirement and don't have anything to retire to, you could see a massive change in our retirees, where if you've got a thoughtful, hey, I'm going to ease into this, maybe, I'm taking this buyout package, I'm getting laid off. Maybe I have enough assets. Maybe I just want to go find something part-time. I like to work with tools. I'm going to go to Home Depot, or whatever the list is. But it does give them that opportunity to maybe even test out. And I have clients who failed at testing. And we joke that they're never going to, they failed at retirement. And some of them take longer to get there. But it is an opportunity to say, what is it that I like to do? Because if you've been doing the same thing for 40, 50 years, you might want to try something new.
Yeah. Again, looking at the silver lining of it is it's not all bad news when it comes to this stuff. And again, when we have clients that are in this sort of bucket, hey, late stage career, they do retire, in some instances we'll see them and they'll say, hey, that was a great thing. Looking back at it, it worked out, for them, that it actually happened and things fell into place like they did. Yeah.
And kind of to talk about what we do with these clients when that comes in is we're starting to re-examine everything, right? Where are you? What's really important now? What do you want to do? And if you don't know what you don't want to do, great. Let's figure out what you might think you might want to do. But also it's just kind of wrapping your arms around where you are, what your assets are. How can you leverage your assets, whether that's your 401ks, your TSPs, your 403s? Does it make sense to leave those at the company? And in some cases, we'll say, until you figure out what you're going to do, let's talk about that. That can be a potential option. If you're getting a severance package and they're still contributing, you're going to want to leave that because it just makes more work. But if you're not, and you're like, hey, I'm really done, then, it opens up the discussion of what makes sense for you. And certainly, when there's market volatility, how does the 401k versus an IRA work? And honestly, what is going to be the best path forward for you and your family?
Yeah, and I would say at this stage, there's likely more planning opportunities than there are in some of the earlier stages, because there's just more moving parts with the potential for Social Security, potential for Roth conversions. There's a lot more opportunities, I would say, here on the planning front than some of the other stages we talked about.
Yeah, and in this case, you might want to start accessing some of those funds in the interim until depending on your age. So having rolling out to an IRA might make a lot more sense. So those are the things that there's a lot more focus in quick things that we can analyze versus the mid and the early career.
For sure.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about sort of the in-between that a lot of people are finding themselves in, where there's, change that's happened, there's potential change on the horizon. And we've had a lot of conversations of, hey, I don't know how things are going to fall into place. I may, have a significant change. I may get laid off. Let's talk about things to have in mind if you're in that group.
Yeah. And, it all goes back to that planning aspect is first and foremost is what our expenses look like. If something were to come along the path where you have that reality, what are things that you can cut? And let's back into what expenses are going to be. And then we have to get that emergency fund funded.
Mm-hmm.
We got to make sure that you have assets earmarked. If that unfortunate situation happens, that we know where we can go, what we can tap, and how long that can last.
Mm-hmm. And I think that if you really envision a couple of different scenarios, if you say, hey, scenario one, we kind of stay down this path, I'm okay. Scenario two, I'll go this route, or scenario three, this route. That's really helpful. So when time, passes by and things play out, you say, hey, you know what, if I were to kind of walk through this in my head and here's, how I'm going to go about handling this.
Yeah. I think the next thing is something you mentioned earlier is, networking. Reach out to your network, have discussions about what they're seeing. Is there opportunities? Because in most cases, your friends who are at other or colleagues or prior colleagues or at other firms may know of, oh my God, we just had this opening. You'd be perfect for it. Or, hey, maybe you should talk to so-and-so. I heard this company. So it's, it's great time if you have those concerns. Start putting your network out there. Start feeling out what companies might have opportunities, what companies might have, other concerns that you may not want to spend time on. But this is a great time to reconnect.
For sure. And I think communicate that with your advisor because there's, obviously the news cycle is so quick. This is happening a lot.
Yep.
And you're better off communicating that to, this may or may not happen and mapping it out versus just getting, surprised and sort of having that sprung on you if you do have it mapped out. So.
Yeah. And then if you are, again, if you think this might be a reality and you are the one who holds the healthcare for the family, think about what those options are. Is there ability to go to your spouses? What would that entail? How long would that take? Because these are all things we got to think about. If you do get laid off and it takes a month or so to get on the other policy, do you take COBRA? What do you do? Do you take a risk? We don't really recommend that. But, again, those are things that we can, walk through. And then the second, probably one of the last things is, what unemployment benefits, how would you apply? What would that cover? Because again, that goes into the whole picture of income and your expenses.
Right. Just the logistics of that for sure.
Yep.
So great. Well, I know this isn't, obviously the happiest of topics to cover, but it's obviously timely. It's obviously important. Hopefully just sharing some of the things that we share today will help, somebody out if they have this on their mind.
Yeah, so I think it's a great time to just kind of take stock, even if you're not concerned. But there's a couple great points in here is making sure that you have your savings, emergency savings up to par, where those things are, and just understanding expenses because it's always a good time at the beginning of the year just to kind of reevaluate where you are and where you're headed.
Yep, never hurts to plan.
Yep.
So great. Well, thank you, Rose.
Well, thank you. And if you like this video and others, please subscribe to our YouTube page to stay up to date for our latest content. And please share this with any friends or family who might be dealing with the situation.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Great Review. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Spotify and recommend our podcast to family and friends. To learn more about VLP Financial Advisors, please check out our website at vlpfa.com. Thanks again.
And now for our necessary disclosures. Securities and advisor services offered through Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, member FINRA SIPC. A broker-dealer and registered investment advisor. All investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will be successful. The views stated in this podcast are not necessarily the opinion of Cetera Advisor Networks, LLC, and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned. Due to the volatility with the markets mentioned, opinions are subject to change without notice. Information is based on sources believed to be reliable. However, their accuracy or completeness cannot be guaranteed. Past performance does not guarantee future results.